And so today I want to take us into Daniel chapter 3. And so if you're following along, Daniel is the last of the major prophets, and we are now in chapter 3. If you were with us last week, I just want to do a really quick recap before we get into the word today, because chapter 2 is going to play a big part into what we're about to read into chapter 3. And I also want us to kind of take into context what the world was like. See, now, when we talk to people today, almost all of the major world religions at this point are monotheism, right? Except the only major world religion that's not monotheistic is Hinduism. They're still polytheistic, but all the major world religions today are monotheistic, meaning one God, okay? This is not how it was for most of human history. Right, they believed that so to put it into context, we have Babylon is come and it's conquered Israel at this point. Babylon has expanded to the largest Babylon will ever be. This is the biggest that Babylon will be, and eventually it will be conquered itself. And Babylon, of course, worships many different gods. They're pagan. They have all kinds of different gods like Nergal, like Marduk, like Tiamat. They have tons and tons of different gods. And that's because they believed that each of the different forces of nature or different things like that are a force of, they had tons and tons of different gods that was going on. And so the reason I bring that up is because although Daniel did the miraculous, right? He solved the mystery. He was able to interpret the vision, and even though he was able to not only interpret the vision, which, is kind of impressive, but more impressively, he was able to understand what the dream was despite never being told, right? That was impressive. Nebuchadnezzar recognizes God as being powerful, but only one of many of the gods. And that's what's going to lead into today's story, right? Because we often, I feel like in a modern context, we'll look back at some of these stories and be like, how foolish were they that they would do this thing? And it's like, well, it didn't radically change their whole worldview. They just went, hey, this God that they worship is also powerful, right? They just thought of him as part of the pantheon, and they didn't realize that, no, it was God was setting himself up as King of Kings, Lord of Lords, the God of gods. He is God. And so in chapter 3, verse 1, we start, despite God showing up and doing this miracle, it says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. Just for context, I think I can't remember exactly, but it's like 80 or 90 feet. It's a huge gold statue, which tells me if it's solid gold, can you imagine what the worth of this? Even if it was plated gold, imagine the worth of this statue. Incredible. 6 cubits wide, and set up on a plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So this is down near the Gulf of Persia. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before it. Then a herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. And as soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and people of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, I want to make this clear because people might be confused. Be like, every nation? I thought this was just Babylon. And that's true. But remember, they didn't recognize nation like we do today with like the way that we understand nation states today. They recognized it as your people, your culture, your group, right? Those were the nations. And so the nation of Israel still existed, but they existed as a part of the Babylonian Empire. And so when they say all nations, they mean all of the people that lived within Babylon would have to bow and worship the statue. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning is he talks about this whole list of people, and he's basically saying all of the important people are there. That's essentially what Daniel's getting at. All of the people that were in charge, all the people that were important, all the VIPs, they were all there, and they all partook in this particular service. And I think it's funny As I mentioned, that he didn't learn his lesson, that God is, of course, the God of gods. But, of course, as I said, we can hardly fault him for that. We cannot look at this story from our 21st century mindset. We have to understand it as they were. And so I can understand why King Nebuchadnezzar didn't quite get it yet. Right? But he's, of course, going to have another revelation given to him later on. And so, of course, he will be given more and more opportunity to understand who God is. But, of course, as was common in that particular day and age, remember, we see this with Pharaoh. We see it with, we're seeing it here with Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to see it later with Caesar, as we talked about the Romans when we were going through the book of Acts. Many of these people, as they would grow more and more powerful and they would conquer more and more of the world and they had more and more power and authority, they believed that they were God as well. And the people began to worship them as gods. And so to exalt himself in this manner, in this spectacular fashion, of course, kind of this happened quite a lot, right? Again, we saw it with Pharaoh. We saw it with many of the different pharaohs. Despite they also served gods, like Claire brought up, Ra and Horus and Imhotep and all these other gods. They still worshipped Pharaoh as one of them because, as far as they were concerned, he was just as powerful as some of the gods. In fact, just so that you guys don't think that I'm overstating my case here, because I would also argue, by the way, that social media has and the cell phone has led to a real epidemic of God complex amongst many more people than ever before. And I don't want you to think I'm overstating this. I want to actually go through some attributes with you so that we can understand, okay, what does it take to be God? Right? When we think of God, and I'm saying God, little g God, as in like a type, not a name, right? Little g God, what makes a God? What makes one a God? And so first thing I believe is that God has supernatural power. We often refer to this as his omnipotence. Now here's the problem with that. Now omnipotence, of course, means all power. But supernatural, I think, is a better way of explaining this, having supernatural power. And the reason I say I think this is better is because we do see this a lot with people in positions of power, right? Presidents and prime ministers and dictators around the world, and they grow and grow in power and influence, and they begin to think of themselves as more than they are. The 20th century was filled of people who had God complexes, who ruled nations. Now today, of course, we have people who have massive influencer, as we refer to it now, influencer count, and they're able to control and sway people, elections, votes, crazy amounts and so I would say supernatural power is better because it's not that they're acting within the natural, they're actually able to harness a whole host of people that otherwise they never would have had access to, and now it seems supernatural. Number 2, God is immortal. God will live forever. I want to ask you, who is one of the most famous pharaohs in all of Egypt? Can anyone name me even one? I immediately expected someone to say King Tut, because King Tutankhamun, of course, famous because of the discovery in the 1920s in Giza. You could, of course, think of Set. You can think of Ramses. There's many famous. Cleopatra, extremely famous. In a way, they've achieved some sort of immortality. And in fact, even today, there are people literally working on immortality. They're called transhumanists, and they believe that we are going to be able to alter the state of humanity, that we can live forever. And they think of themselves as not only able, but worthy of such a thing. God, number 3, God is all-knowing. We all have that friend. We all know those people who think they know everything. And we've all had that argument with somebody. I'm sure, John, you've probably argued with people about cars. I know I've argued with people about computers. Like, you guys know, I have a computer engineering background. And I don't know how many times people will come at me in my place of expertise and try and tell me that I'm wrong about something I know I'm right because I've done it hundreds of thousands of times. Right? I'm sure you've heard the same thing, John. Everyone here, like, we all have an area that we are really, really good at, And usually there's someone that tries to tell us how we're wrong. And we're like, you don't know what you're talking about. But people get this God complex where they feel like, I know everything. Number 4, God is the moral authority, right? And for this one, I put the attitude that we see a lot is, I know what's best. In fact, we even see people say this about God, right? They'll say, if God is real, then God is immoral, which of course is a judgment saying that they know better than God, which is incredibly arrogant. But people do this all the time, right? They'll set themselves up and say they're the moral authority. They know what's right. They know what's wrong. And they know better than anyone else. Number 5, God is worshipped, right? This is true. We know God is worshipped. I put in my parentheses here, I'm amazing. Let's face it, celebrity culture has just exploded to the point where people that aren't even celebrities somehow are able to attract attention and create celebrity out of non-celebrity. I do not understand this. I think the Kardashians were probably the first to successfully achieve this, but they're certainly not the last. There have been so many people who've become famous for being famous. No other reason. They're not like amazing at something. They didn't add it's not like there's some great inventor who solved world hunger or brought world peace or anything like that. They're just famous because they are. Right? This is incredible. And yet they are worshipped and venerated by those that follow them. Of course, adding to the God complex. Number 6, God is creator. Right? God creates. Once again, I put, I am amazing, because there are people who think of themselves as this. I'll never forget, till the day I die, I thought this was so ridiculous. There's a picture of Kanye West next to, oh my goodness, I'm going to forget his name. He's one of the Beatles, Paul McCartney. And Kanye West got his arm around Paul McCartney and took a picture, and he was excited for it. And one of the followers of Kanye West said, it's so good of you to try and uplift these smaller artists. This is Paul McCartney, right? But this is what I mean. Like there's just this misunderstanding because people are so uninformed, and yet they will literally venerate and worship these people as some sort of something that they are not, that they are amazing. And then the last thing I want to mention about what makes God is transcendent. He is not like us. And I'm sure many of you have maybe even heard someone say it just like this, get on my level. You ever heard someone say that? I'm not like you, I'm better than you. There are people that talk like this all the time. The God complex is real, and it's here, and it's a problem. And yet, while no person, I've never met someone with such a super God complex that they had all 7 of these attributes, right? They thought they were going to live forever. They thought they had all this power. I know many people that have attributes of this. And honestly, as I was going through this list, and as I was making this list and as I was going through it, I was like, you know what? I need to examine myself too and make sure that I stay humble, because the exact opposite of all these things is humility and recognizing our station, right? Recognizing our ability, our power. So do you recognize this? Do you see it in yourself? Do you see it in yourself maybe even in the past, right? Maybe you've grown and you realized how bad this was, how toxic it was in your life. But this is where Nebuchadnezzar is. He's basically got to this point where all these things are in his world, and he's being venerated. He's going through all these things, and he realizes, or he thinks to himself, hey, I am a god. Why shouldn't I be worshipped as God? Look what I've accomplished. Look what I have done. Look what I am capable of. And to his credit, we're still talking about him today, right? 2,500 years later. So let's continue on. Chapter 3, verse 8 says, at this time some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you. Your majesty, neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up." So furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this manner. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand." And this is the part that we were talking about earlier, Michelle, where most people like to stop. We just declare it and it will happen, but that's not what it says, verse 18. "But even if he does not, we want you to know that your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Now, something always struck me as really odd about this story, okay? Simply because, have any of you ever seen like a forge or a furnace that's used to purify metal? Have any of you ever seen pictures or anything? Like, they're not very big. So I was always like, man, like how big was this? What was it? Because that is something that is very clear as we read about the fiery furnace in Daniel chapter 3. When we translate it from Hebrew into English, they're not talking about some tiny little furnace that we use, that hobbyists would use. Because let's face it, modern furnaces today, even modern industrial furnaces, are relatively small in comparison. Because we have access to different kinds of energy and we're much more efficient and stuff like that. And so one of the things that I was thinking about is, how on earth would you throw not just one, but 3 men into a fiery furnace? Because a lot of us would be more familiar maybe with movies where we see like a blacksmith working a forge. And even that, although as big as that was, it's not big enough to throw 3 people in and for them to walk freely around, right? Like they're still relatively small. And so I got looking it up, and I wanted to find, so I got you a picture here. This is actually, it was discovered, it's an ancient Sumerian furnace. This isn't, it wouldn't be exactly like this, but this is a type of furnace that the Sumerians used. And it was mainly used for pottery. And if you notice, right here is a door. These things are huge, okay? And so part of, like, these furnaces were massive, and the reason is because Babylon, if you remember, is known for its artistry and its craft, and they crafted crazy amounts of pottery and crazy amounts of artisanal level pottery, and part of that was, and part of it especially for the king, because the king would have requisitioned, like, remember we talked about a statue 90 feet tall of gold? You're going to need a lot of furnace power in order to purify all that gold. So they had massive furnaces available to them in the king. Like, obviously not all metal workers and pottery workers would have had a furnace this big, but we do have proof and records of furnaces that were this big. And so when I saw that for the first time, I was like, wow, no wonder they were able to do this. And not only that, and in fact, the one in this picture isn't as old as the ancient Sumerian Empire, but it was built in their fashion. But you could see how, if you've ever fired clay before, if you've ever worked with pottery and fired clay to make it harden and get the finish, you understand the intensity of the heat. And you can understand if the fire was that big to fire all of that pottery, or to, if you've ever been near, anyone ever seen pictures of them when they're working in an iron smeltery and stuff like that? Like, they got to wear that protective gear because it is so hot, it'll kill you. So I get it when it says here in verse 19 that Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. So he commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into a blazing furnace. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, leapt to his feet in amazement and asked for his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we just tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like the son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening to the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that their fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation, language, or tongue that says anything against God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be cut into pieces, their houses turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So a couple things. Number one, you notice Nebuchadnezzar still doesn't quite get it, right? He still thinks God is one of many gods, but he seems to be a special God. He seems so special that he's been able to do, not only was he able to see the vision, but now he's been able to save from the fire. Incredible. This fire which killed the people that tried to get near it. And by the way, have any of you ever been to like an intense fire like that? Like I remember in the year 2000, I went to Canada's Wonderland, and they had like a special event that year where the mountain was going to erupt, and it erupted every night, like for all the year 2000. And one of the things that they did, and I remember we were standing way back at the gates, and if you've ever been to Wonderland, you know how far away that is from the peak of the mountain. Like, it's quite a ways away. And they would let out this huge plume of fire right near the end, and it was massive. And I remember the intensity and the heat I felt on my face some, like, hundreds of yards away. It was so hot. Right? Fire can be incredibly intense. I was talking to Claire about this the other day. I said, the sun, like that's how we know the sun is really intense and really, really hot. And even though it's like 1,000,000 miles away, we're getting burned on our skin just standing out in the sun too long. Like that's how intense it is. But to me, the best part of this entire story, right? That's usually the part of the story we focus on. They got saved. Hallelujah. That was good news. But to me, my favorite part of this is the faith and the perseverance of those who were to be punished. They had no way of knowing whether God was going to save them. None at all. They were bound, and probably not very comfortably by the sound of it, right? He went and got the strongest men to make sure they were the tightest bindings. So they weren't exactly having an easy time of it. They bound them. They were very likely injured, and they were brought forward. And you better believe they probably felt that heat getting hotter and hotter as they drew closer and closer. But my favorite line of this whole story is verse 18. But even if he does not, if God doesn't show up, if God doesn't save us, I know he can, but if he doesn't, we want you to know, your majesty, we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Remember, at this time, the 10 Commandments have been around for hundreds of years, and they took it seriously. Our God is one, and we will not worship idols. Our God is God of gods, King of kings, Lord of lords, the God of the universe, and we will not worship anything else. Nothing else is worthy of our veneration. Nothing else is worthy of exaltation. It is only him. This is faith. Faith that God will not give you just what you want, but faith that he is able. He is power. And he is that entire list that we covered before. He has all knowledge. He has all authority. God is eternal. God is transcendent. God is creator. God is worthy of all praise. And this is the God that we serve today, ladies and gentlemen. So if you're wondering to yourself, right? So before we leave this idea, this whole thing, I want us to just make sure we really cover this idea of idolatry once again, because I brought it up in our about the comparison with our culture for a reason. Because I think idolatry, it's funny, we always worry about a lot of the other sins, and a lot of the other sins are bad. But there's a reason why number 1 and number 2 on the 10 Commandments are number 1 and number 2. Because we need to recognize that God is God, that He is He is the great I am. There is no other. It is Him and Him alone. And we should not and shall not and will not worship anything else. I don't want to use the word idols because I feel like that draws in some other things. I think just make it plain. Anything else. Do not worship it. Because it is not worthy. It is not worthy of your exaltation, your praise. And I don't think we talk about idolatry well enough. I remember I was a new Christian when American Idol started. And I remember even the name bothered me at the time. And yet it's so true. And I think the fact that it still exists and the fact that people are so numb to it and how many Christians go on to become idolized, I don't think we realize the problem with that. But see, in many cases today, people have also become their own God, right? They're the moral authority. They know what's best. They know what they need to do. They're the ones that know themselves the most. They know exactly how they ought to live. And it's why, as I mentioned to Claire earlier, it's why, despite her protest, I won't let Claire watch Frozen 2 ever again, because even in our children's media, they're introducing this idea that you are God, and you are powerful enough, and you can do this on your own. You don't need anyone else or anything else. You are power and God. And friends, the reason I think this is so important is because this has been coming into the church. And it comes into the church subtly and silently and sneakily. And then before you know it, you start hearing about these people who call themselves Christians and yet say that they are God. It's known as a little God's doctrine, by the way. And it's been sneaking and creeping for the last 50 or more years, slowly into the church, slowly corrupting more and more people. So how do we fix it? What's the cure? It's easy. It's humility. That's it. How do I avoid all these troubles, these problems? How do I avoid all these challenges and these difficulties? And I'll tell you how. Be humble. Don't think of yourself as more than you are. Don't puff yourself up. If you find yourself feeling all puffed up and proud, just take a moment to be like, okay, whoa, okay, I got to deflate my ego a little bit. Right? I think I had this, I mentioned this a while ago, because I used to be really confused over the way that we use the word pride, and I think it's because oftentimes we'll use the word pride and substitute for joy, because we'll say something like, I'm really proud of my kids. And I think that maybe that's probably the wrong emotion to emit. I think a lot of times when we're proud of our kids, we find that our children are bringing us joy. I think there's a big difference, right? I see what they're doing. I see how they're going. I see what they're how much they're accomplishing, and that makes me happy, right? That's different than pride. Pride is look what I've made. Look at how successful my child is because of what I've done. How successful I am, right? There's a difference. And the cure is simple: humility. But just like any other skill, just like any other thing in our life, it has to be practiced. You want to get better at it? Practice, right? You want to get better at cursive writing, Claire? What do you got to do? Practice. You want to be better at guitar, you got to practice. You want to be better at your job, you got to practice. You got to put in the reps. You want to be better at anything, continue, do it more, practice, retrain yourself. And if you want to be more humble, you got to practice humility. It means on the daily, making sure you check yourself and ask yourself, hey, is this Am I allowing myself to become puffed up? Am I allowing myself to become conceited? Am I worshiping myself over God? Do I think I know better than God? Because let's face it, I know when I was a young Christian, I made this mistake, and I'm sure many other Christians have made this mistake too, where we read the Bible and we said, I don't like that. Let's face it, Oprah's whole church, Oprah's whole thing was that she read about God was a jealous God and went, I don't like that. And she started her whole own movement. She didn't understand what she was reading. Instead of saying, you know what does God say about himself? Let me understand God and the way that God expresses himself. She instead said, I don't like it, and therefore I know better. And I'm going to do my own thing. I know I've done that, where I read my culture, I read my beliefs, I read my history into the Bible, instead of just sitting down and going, you know what, I want to read the Scripture, and I want to see the Scripture for what the Scripture says, and allow it instead to speak to me. So we got to be careful when we're reading the Bible, because there's a reason why so many people can read the Bible and come away with different opinions. It's because we often read ourselves into the Word instead of allowing the Word to speak into us. So what do we got to do? We got to practice humility. Let's recognize who we are. Let's recognize we're not bringing anything to the Word. We can't add anything to the Word. We can't add anything to the biblical story because it's already there. It's already complete, and it's already the true revelation of God. So let's not be like King Nebuchadnezzar and fail to check ourselves, but instead be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and say, look, God gave me a rule. God told me to do this thing, and I may not know whether or not he's going to be there for me. You may throw me into the fiery furnace, but you know what? I will continue to serve my God no matter what. Because many of us will go through those trials. Many of us will be put through very difficult things because of our faith, because we stand up for it and we say, I will not back down. But just know that God is with you, whether he saves you or not, and he recognizes your role and what you're doing, and just know that if you practice humility, if you do these things, God will smile upon you and say, well done, good and faithful servant.